Thank you very much, Your Eminence. And I would like to begin by echoing his words and welcoming you all very warmly to this important encounter. Indeed, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome perhaps some of you also online. I'm not quite sure, but certainly the people who are here in the room now. Our meeting starts with the word dialogue. And for us as a Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, we take the teaching of the Holy Father as a central guide for our work. And a meeting focused on dialogue for the sake of deeper mutual understanding and towards creating a dialogical culture is certainly working along the lines that Pope Francis has indicated as the way forward for humanity in the face of its current crises. So dialogue is one of the key terms in Pope Francis's vocabulary. It's very interesting for us to explore it here in this meeting. And that's especially the case in his social teaching. He uses the word dialogue more in his encyclicals Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti than it is used in previous social teaching. So he's upped the game, so to speak, on this idea of dialogue. And at the beginning of Laudato Si, he says in a quite straightforward way, I would like to enter into dialogue with all people about our common home. The same word common there, the common home, the global commons. So I see this meeting as a direct response to that call. Now, the idea of dialogue comes into the Church's social teaching, and that's the part of the Church's teaching which is most relevant to us here in the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. But the idea of dialogue comes into that body of thought at the time of the Second Vatican Council with the Apostolic Constitution Gaudium et Spes, which is published in 1965. Now, it's interesting that we find the term fraternal dialogue there, which links fraternity, another term of great importance to Pope Francis, with dialogue, fraternal dialogue. Now, as far as I know, this term, fraternal dialogue, was coined by Dominique Pierre. He was a Belgian Dominican friar who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1958 for the work he had done with what were called the hardcore refugees at the time. We're talking about the old, the sick, the families with children, all those whom the countries behind the settlement scheme, as it was called then, didn't want to take, and who just got left in a kind of limbo. Now, he saw fraternal dialogue as a key to mutual understanding and to peace building. It's one of the main reasons why he received the Nobel Prize, because of developing this idea of fraternal dialogue. In 1966, he published a book with the title Building Peace that is a dialogue in itself. The book is a dialogue. And that, of course, brings us back to the most ancient texts of Western civilization and Plato and these early thinkers who always wrote in terms of dialogue. Now, in it, Pierre explains what he sees to be the key elements of fraternal dialogue. And if I were to draw out the three most important points just to help launch our meeting of what is actually quite a complex set of dialogues that he has, I would choose these 3 points. So first of all, fraternal dialogue is situated between extremes. Okay? We can characterize these extremes in different ways. So one way to think about these extremes is, on the one hand, suppression of the other's point of view, and on the other side, complete submission to the other's point of view. Suppression or submission. These would be two extremes. Fraternal dialogue is in the middle between them. These extremes can also be expressed as having blind trust in the other, what he calls open heart, closed eyes, or else complete cynicism towards the other, what he calls closed heart, open eyes, whereas fraternal dialogue has open heart and open eyes. So that's the first point. Fraternal dialogue is situated between extremes. We can end up in extremes. It lives in the tension between these extremes. The second thing is the stages he talks about, the stages we need to go through to enter into genuine fraternal dialogue. He sees three main stages. The first is to start to work together. This is very interesting. To work together for a shared goal. Maybe we could see ourselves doing that in this meeting. Because as we work together, we start to move into the second stage. That is, we begin to recognize and appreciate the nobility of the motivation of the other who has entered into this shared practical project from a very different starting point from our own. So he calls this second stage the stage of good disagreement. And then the third and last stage is to allow that different position from our own to raise questions for our own position on our own way of seeing the world. And he recognizes, of course, that doing this is not easy. It is like climbing a mountain. Many people never get there at all. Some people only get to the base camp, and only a very few put in the effort and the sacrifice into getting to the top. So that's the second point, these stages of the fraternal dialogue. The third and last point is the question of the search for truth, because the search for truth is really central to Pierre's idea of fraternal dialogue. A lazy approach to dialogue could end up in a position of relativism, or the idea that we often hear today that this is true for me, that is true for you, as if there's no truth beyond subjective understanding that each one of us have. For Pierre, we do not possess the truth. Rather, we participate in it. Or we could say, perhaps, that the truth possesses us. For truth is always greater than we are. And we can see fraternal dialogue as an opportunity to enter more deeply into that truth, learning from and listening to the other. So those are the 3 points I draw out of Pierre. Just to finish with Pope Francis again. The first time Pope Francis mentions dialogue in Fratelli Tutti, it is in relation to the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together that he signed with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Al-Tayeb. In this latter document, the last reference to dialogue concerns relations between the East and the West. So I'd just like to finish by reading what he says there. Good relations between East and West are indisputably necessary for both. They must not be neglected so that each can be enriched by the other's culture through fruitful exchange and dialogue. The West can discover in the East remedies for those spiritual and religious maladies that are caused by prevailing materialism. And the East can find in the West many elements that can help free it from weakness, division, conflict, and scientific, technical, and cultural decline. It is important to pay attention to religious, cultural, and historical differences that are a vital component in shaping the character, culture, and civilization of the East. It is likewise important to reinforce the bond of fundamental human rights in order to help ensure a dignified life for all the men and women of East and West, avoiding the politics of double standards. So I hope that in our meeting today, we can advance these good relations that Pope Francis is looking for between the East and the West in the ways he suggested, but also in many other ways that you will bring into this meeting today. Thank you very much for your presence and your attention.